Most of the executives that I work with want three things. One, they want to lead a healthy and growing company. Two, they want to contribute the best that they have to offer. And three, they want to make the world a better place. Now, I call these three growth, satisfaction, and legacy. If that doesn't sound like you, if you're just here for the money and you'll destroy the earth or anybody in your way to get it, then this video isn't for you. Best of luck. But if you are one of the many executives who wants growth, satisfaction, and legacy, then I've got something to share with you. You, your business, and your community were designed to flourish, but obstacles are blocking this natural outcome. As leaders, our job isn't to create growth, satisfaction, and legacy. Our job is just to remove the obstacles preventing them, so flourishing can flow freely from us through our organization to the world around us. I use this word flourishing, and if that sounds a little spiritual, it's because it is. Flourishing is the best word we have to translate an ancient Hebrew word called shalom. My dad was a pastor when I was growing up, so I learned a lot about ancient Hebrew. And shalom is this fascinating word that many people think means peace, but in reality, it's so much more. It actually means abundance, completeness, harmony, health, peace, perfection, prosperity, rest, and wholeness. But here's the twist. Shalom, or flourishing, isn't just that list of attributes. It's also how the world was originally created to be and how it will be again one day in the future. Flourishing is the default setting of the universe. Now, some of you might be thinking I'm crazy and wondering to yourselves, has this guy ever heard of Rwanda? Has he ever heard of human trafficking and global warming and COVID and any of these terrible, terrible things that have happened in the world? And yes, I know the world is a deeply broken place, and there's plenty of examples that every one of us could give of where we've experienced everything but flourishing. But I would argue that if pain, suffering, destruction, and injustice were normal, then they wouldn't break our hearts like they do. The reason these atrocities hurt is because our hearts long for flourishing. They were created for it. And where we see pain, suffering, discrimination, injustice, it's not because normal is good or because bad is good and normal is the anomaly. Rather, flourishing is what's normal. And we just don't see it very often because there's so many obstacles in the way. Think about flourishing like a garden. Every spring, my backyard explodes in vegetation. Now, many of these are weeds, don't judge, but I don't have to coach, direct, manage, or incentivize these plants to grow. They just grow because that's what plants do. If you see plants that are not growing, well, there's a reason. There's something in the way. You can maybe adjust the sunlight or the water or the soil to help them flourish, but I don't actually make any of these things grow. Or maybe water's a better example. You don't have to coach, direct, incentivize, or manage water to flow downhill. That's just what water does. If you don't see it flowing downhill, it's because something's blocking it. Personally, I think this is great news for leaders because for most of us, our job can feel like pushing a rock up a hill every day, right? We push the rock up the hill every day, every evening it rolls back down, and we wake up tomorrow and we try to do it again. But I suggest that's the wrong visual. It's the wrong analogy. We don't have to make things flourish. We don't have to make things grow, create satisfaction or legacy because we can't. All we can do is address the obstacles that are in the way. And I found three kinds of obstacles that block flourishing. Interestingly enough, they align with the three things we said we all want: growth, satisfaction, and legacy. First, organizational obstacles block company flourishing. A couple years ago, I was working with a company, with a tech company, and it was very results focused. And I challenged one of their senior executives that they didn't really have a compelling vision. And he strongly disagreed. He was like, our vision is to become a $500 million company. And I said, that's not a vision. That's a result. It's a measurement. It's a goal, but it's not a vision. And he argued. He's like, that's a very clear vision statement. And I said, okay, can I sell $500 million worth of ice cream? And he's like, well, no, of course not. We're a technology company. And I said, okay, but your vision didn't say anything about technology. You just said you wanted $500 million. If I sell $500 million worth of ice cream, what's the problem? You didn't really have an answer to that. Now, I probably could work on my people skills, probably shouldn't have called him out in front of his team like that. But do you see the obstacle there? right? His vision statement provided no clarity and no motivation. The only people who care about 500 million in revenue are the investors and the owners. There's no strategy. There was no standard operating procedures. The employees had no sense of purpose or meaning. The culture was a mess. And as you've probably guessed, the company wasn't growing. Every organization, for-profit, nonprofit, startup, multinational conglomerate, every organization has 4 dimensions to it. Vision. What's the future we want to see? Journey. What are the steps we're going to take to see that vision? Culture. How are we going to behave along the way? And results. How will we measure our progress? Companies grow when they align these 4 cornerstones. You can call them whatever you want. Sometimes it's easy for me to think about them as purpose, process, people, and profits. But regardless of what you call them, any misalignment of these 4 creates obstacles to growth. The more aligned they are, the more healthy and effective an organization is going to be. And the more healthy and effective things are, the more likely they are to grow. Can you grow without being healthy and effective? Well, sure, but not for very long. And it's certainly going to be a lot harder than it needs to be. Here's an example from Apple. Apple's vision statement is to make the best products on earth and to leave the world better than we found it. Okay. Their journey, what they call their mission statement, is to bring the best user experience to customers through innovative hardware, software, and services. Sounds clear. We know what they're trying to do, how they're going to do it. What about their culture? Their values are accessibility, education, a planet-sized plan, we're all in, privacy is a human right, racial equality and justice, and supplier responsibility. There's a lot that goes into those, but they sound pretty well aligned with this whole making the world better than we found it kind of thing, right? What about the results? Last quarter, they had made almost $95 billion in revenue, $24 billion in profit. They've got a market cap of $3 trillion. They've got a plan to be carbon neutral by 2030, and they've donated over $100 million to lower income schools here in the US. Sounds to me like they're flourishing. And all 4 of those foundational cornerstones, vision, journey, culture, and result, are very well aligned. What are the organizational obstacles blocking your company's growth? Second, internal obstacles block personal flourishing. I worked with this leader a couple of years ago who was the exact opposite of passive-aggressive. Maybe you call that aggressive-aggressive. He loved conflict. He was not okay without conflict. I'm not a psychologist, but it seems like something's pretty off when you need conflict to feel okay, when you need crisis. In fact, if there wasn't a conflict or a crisis, he would actually go looking through his email for things that hadn't been resolved, and so he could kind of resurrect them and turn them into crisis. At one point, this got so bad that his team started creating fake crises to keep him distracted so the rest of the team could get their work done. This internal obstacle that he had created an atmosphere of anxiety, and this cortisol culture resulted in a lot of turnover for the company. It's not a popular thing to say, but unfortunately it's very true that for most executives, we are our own worst enemies. Our fears, insecurities, ego, limiting beliefs, unprocessed trauma, lack of self-awareness, even our well-intentioned bad habits, these become internal obstacles that block our personal flourishing and satisfaction. We can't become the people, the spouses, the parents, the leaders we want to be if we don't look in the mirror and deal with what we find. Internal obstacles block our flourishing as leaders and as human beings. We can't become the best version of ourselves if we're unwilling to do this interior work. And we can't become leaders, good leaders, if we don't first become good people. But there's hope. Change can happen. 2 clients of mine have recently shared this with me. One of them said, my sales are up 140% since we started working together a couple of years ago. My time working in the business is as little as it's ever been, and our results are as good as they've ever been. But so much of this is a mental shift, a decision to think differently about my role and to put the right people around me. This is what he said. He said, I was in my own way. I had to overcome my own guilt and finally believe that if I give the right people the right responsibilities, they will rise to the occasion. Another client of mine just recently said, you know what's happened for me in the last 6 months? I've stopped hating myself. I didn't realize how much I was hating myself, but now I've received forgiveness and I've accepted myself. Now, those are great stories, but here's the hard part. Our internal obstacles are usually hidden in our blind spots. We can't see them, but everybody else around us can. So we can't do this interior work alone. We need help. Who's helping you find and remove those internal obstacles that are blocking your satisfaction? Thirdly, systemic obstacles block community flourishing. I saw this story on Reddit where somebody said, I've got 6 bills lined up to come out on every payday. On payday, I had an unexpected emergency and didn't have enough money to take care of the crisis and pay my bills. My 6 bills all got NSF'd, which is short for insufficient funds, when your bank charges you for spending money you don't have. $45 for each of them at my bank, even for my $8 Spotify charge and my $15 Netflix. So now my account has negative $270. I can't believe how expensive it is to be poor. In 2021, US banks made nearly $12 billion in NSF fees. But according to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, 9% of customers accounted for 80% of them. It's very expensive to be poor. And for many low-income families, the costs of account fees and late fees and NSFs and payday loans and prepaid card fees, this can make financial services the second largest line item in their monthly budget, behind housing, but ahead of food and utilities. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, from the legitimate to the predatory, but I want to focus on the systemic obstacles, the laws, the regulations, the cultures, the zoning decisions, even the business models that block community flourishing. The world is a deeply broken place, and sometimes, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that brokenness becomes hardwired in our organizations and in our industries. But finding and removing these systemic obstacles can make the world a better place and create legacy for all those involved. Remember where we started. Flourishing is the default setting of the universe. This means that if your business model depends on exploitive, deceptive, exclusive, hazardous, combative, scarce, or even captive dynamics, then you're at odds with the fundamental nature of the universe, and the days of your business model are numbered. My favorite story about this is a guy named Bill McDonald, who worked with Roner Textile. Back in the 1990s, the textile industry was notoriously toxic. And I'm not talking about their culture, I'm talking about actual toxic waste that was produced while making these chemicals. In fact, a significant portion of their cost structure was driven by hazardous materials, shipping and moving chemicals, providing hazmat suits for the employees, transportation of hazardous waste, testing from the regulatory bodies. It was just not good. Bill McDonald had this vision to make textiles that were safe enough to eat. Everyone said it was impossible, said it could never be done. He tried to get manufacturers to work with him, and 60 chemical manufacturers turned him down. But finally, one company agreed to try. They tested 8,000 chemicals, and only 38% of them were safe enough to eat. But from that 38, he made a complete line of fabrics. Now, when they moved into production, the wastewater coming out of the factory was so clean that the inspectors thought their instruments were broken. The water leaving the factory was actually cleaner than the water coming into the factory, and the scraps were being able to be used for crops as insulation. The employees were safer, and the manufacturing cost shrunk by 20%. This is flourishing, right? Everyone said it was impossible. They said, this is just the way we've always done things. But the removal of systemic obstacles created flourishing for the company, for the employees, for the investors, for the environment, and legacy for everyone involved. How could you address some of the systemic obstacles in your industry or in your community to create a flourishing legacy? In conclusion, I recently quit my job. The organization I'd been leading for 4 years was a mess, and I was miserable. The vision was strong. Our journey, the processes, they were okay, probably needed to be tightened up a little bit, but the culture was a mess. A lot of confusion, a lot of frustration within the team. And so the results were mixed. We were making a positive impact in the world, but it was coming with a very high relational and emotional cost. We had a lot of organizational obstacles, and we were not flourishing. But there were also obstacles inside of me. My pride and passivity had made me pretty ineffective as an executive. I was anxious, scattered, overwhelmed, miserable. So after talking with the board, my wife, and a couple of friends, I resigned. Looking back now, several months later, I can see now what I couldn't see then. You can't give what you don't have. I wanted to make the world a better place. Motivated by this flourishing vision, I overlooked the importance of creating a flourishing organization and being a flourishing leader. I wasn't flourishing, I was failing. Flourishing flows from the inside out. Flourishing leaders create flourishing companies create flourishing industries and flourishing communities. We shouldn't try to solve the world's problems until we've spent some time working on our own internal obstacles and the obstacles within our organizations. We all want growth, satisfaction, and legacy, but these desires are blocked by the internal, organizational, and systemic obstacles we've talked about. What are the obstacles blocking you right now? Thanks for listening.